Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. I recently did a video about some obscure and forgotten action RPGs and action adventures and people seem to like that video a lot. I already had some plans to make more similar videos because there are a lot more games I wish to revisit. The majority of those games are not so well known and they seem to be a great fit for these videos. So without further ado, these are 5 more obscure and forgotten games that I recently played. Right after I tell you about the sponsor of this video. This video is sponsored by Bloodline's Heroes of Lithas, a hero collecting fantasy RPG where you can build your kingdom and create your own unique legendary champions. Bloodlines allow you to combine elves, demons, demigods, orcs, dwarves, lycans, dragonborn and vampires in order to create a very unique champion. If you download the game right now, you will receive an amazing starter pack. What's even better, you can get a brand new Gold Truck champion for free by participating in the upcoming Christmas event starting on December 22nd, so now is definitely the best time to try out the game. You can combine this brand new lineage of bloodlines with the existing ones to get even stronger hybrids. Starting this December, all players can enjoy battling in the Guild War, Valley of Conquerors, and you can be rewarded with legendary hybrids. Conquer territories with your guild members and claim rewards to create the most unique hybrid champion called Bloodcraft Legends. You'll get a chance to claim Bloodcraft champion Scarlet for free by simply beating your enemies. New bloodlines and legendary hybrids are constantly being released, which gives you the endless possibilities for creating your own unique playstyle. Download the game for free right now by scanning the QR codes or using the link in the description. You'll get a special starter pack worth $20 and a new Lycan champion for free this Christmas. The special starter pack is available for the next 30 days. Number 5. Demonicon. Demonicon is an action RPG released in 2013 for PC, PS3 and Xbox 360. I started playing Demonicon shortly after I made the first video about forgotten and obscure RPGs because I had a ton of suggestions for this game in the comments. The reception for this game was pretty average. The user score on Metacritic is slightly higher than the critic score, it has mixed reviews on Steam and 3.5 stars on GOG. It's not so hard to see that Demonicon was on a very tight budget.
Alright, none of my business. Can I go now?
Don't get me wrong, I'm no stranger to playing AA RPGs and lower budget games in general, but Demonicon feels extremely cheap in certain areas. Although the quality of the intro cutscene begs to differ. It's a pretty good cutscene and a solid introduction to the story. First of all, I've gained the impression that this game desperately tried to beat Dragon Age on a budget. Most of the UI elements have a very similar design and the color palette is reminiscent of Dragon Age Origins. So naturally, Demonicon is focused a lot on telling an interesting story with varying degrees of success.
Enough, I'm not here for sex.
You're not? But I was told you were coming.
Demonicon starts in the dungeons of Moloch Mountains. Chiron is the main protagonist of the game and there are no customization options of any kind. That's a bit disappointing because Chiron looks and acts like a pretty generic fantasy character. He is trying to find his sister Kalandra, who apparently got lost in this dangerous dungeon. Why? Well, she ran away because your father is trying to force her into marrying this rich dude. Shortly after the beginning, you manage to find her and now you have to kill the crazy cannibal from this dungeon. In the meantime, you get some strange magical powers and you get to make what's seemingly an important decision in the story. The game plays out a bit differently depending on the choices you make, which is definitely worth some praise. You can see some minor consequences of your decisions, in terms of NPCs mentioning your past actions and something similar to that effect. Anyway, Chiron desperately tries to save his sister from marrying this dude because he really loves her. Ah, that's so sweet, he's such a good brother. Wait, what the actual fuck?
And now?
Well, no one's watching.
Chiron! It's not funny.
Yeah, this happens shortly after the beginning. But don't worry, this is perfectly normal because later in the game your father tells you that she's not actually your sister.
Chiron, Kalandra is not your sister.
Yeah, that certainly justifies your sick fantasies, Chiron.
Enough, I'm not here for sex. Well, no one's watching.
To be fair, Calandra made the first move to kiss her fucking brother, but whatever. Oh, and by the way, it's mentioned multiple times that she's a virgin, so there's that as well. Now I can see why so many people recommended me this game. You sick fuck. The story started to lose me after about 6 hours of gameplay because it gets a bit convoluted and boring if you ask me. However, if you can ignore some of those issues, you might find the story interesting.
Well,
let's just talk about the gameplay. The combat in this game is pretty rough, to put it lightly. Demonicon has an action combat system with really bad animations and stiff controls. The controls are not exactly unresponsive, I've experienced a lot worse than this. But moving your character around in combat feels extremely stiff and imprecise. The animation for moving around with your weapon drawn is one of the worst I ever experienced, to be honest. Most abilities you can use share the same animations, although different magic skills have unique looking effects. However, most of these magic abilities are doing the exact same thing. The combat system tries to be skill based, but it does a pretty poor job with that. One thing is for sure, it's perfectly functional, it's not broken by any means. You'll have to dodge enemy attacks and have a somewhat decent timing of your abilities, but it just doesn't feel good for many different reasons we mentioned. The game has quite a few boss fights, which was pretty ambitious, but the mechanics are just horrible for the most part. You can get used to the combat after a while, I guess, but then again, even if you stand in shit for long enough, it will stop smelling bad. That's a bit cruel, but I would lie to you if I said that this game has a good combat system. On the other side, the game has plenty of dialogue and skill checks, which you can take the advantage of. Outside of dialogue, you can find some chests to loot and plans to pick up if you have a certain skill. That's all fine and dandy, but can you please explain why do I need a skill to pick up a damn flower? Yeah, some RPG mechanics feel a bit forced. This game has a very linear level design and the exploration is almost non-existent. There are a few different maps, which are pretty small in general, with narrow passages, a lot of invisible walls and tiny areas. We could talk about this game a lot more, but we have to move on. Would I recommend buying it? Not really, unless you're really bored and you like watching incest in the first 15 minutes of the game. You're gonna buy it, aren't you?
no one's watching.
Number 4, Loki. Loki is a Diablo-like action RPG that came out in 2007 for Microsoft Windows. Around the same time period I was playing Titan Quest a lot, another Diablo-like action RPG that came out in 2006. When I got bored of Titan Quest after God knows how many hours, I eventually started looking for a new, similar game. I can't exactly remember how I discovered Loki, and I don't know a single person on Earth who heard about this game before. As the majority of games on this list, the reception for Loki was really average. It managed to score 61 from critics and 5.7 from users on Metacritic, and it has mixed reviews on Steam. Anyway, Loki allows you to choose between 4 unique characters. All of the playable characters are from different mythologies, and they start the game in different locations with different quests to solve. It's a really interesting premise for the story, especially for a Diablo-like RPG, but the story itself is your typical mythology stuff.
We carried off the wolf and raised him ourselves, so as to keep an eye on him, since it was foretold that he would devour Odin at Ragnarok.
When I started playing the game again, I went with the Norse hero, but I also played a little bit with other heroes, just for comparison's sake. Loki has some specific technical issues which can be very annoying. I played the game on 4K with very decent frame rates. Although you're going to experience a lot of frame drops, and even when your FPS is very high, the game seems like it's dropping or skipping frames, which makes the gameplay feel really choppy. As for the gameplay itself, I always have the same criteria when it comes to Diablo-like games. The most basic thing you need to get right is to make the player feel good when you click on the enemy in order to kill them. Unfortunately, there are a couple of major reasons why Loki does a poor job with this. First of all, the controls feel sluggish and very unresponsive, especially if you compare the game to modern action RPGs. But even if you compare it to Titan Quest, the game that came out before Loki, or even the original Diablo 2, it feels way worse. There is a noticeable delay or input lag for every action you do, and even moving around doesn't feel smooth, which is a huge problem. As for the gameplay elements, Loki has a pretty standard Diablo-like formula. Loki fails to distinguish itself from other Diablo-like games because it doesn't offer anything unique, but that wouldn't be a problem if the gameplay was a bit better. Loki has 3 difficulty levels that you can only unlock after you complete the previous difficulty. Each hero has 3 different skill trees, and casting spells is pretty much identical to Diablo 2. You have to select the ability from the action bar and then use the right mouse button to cast it. This worked fine when Diablo 2 came out. But similar games that came out only a couple of years after Diablo 2 started using a much better system for casting spells. You just press the corresponding button to instantly cast a different spell, it's much more convenient. But Loki decided to use an outdated system for some reason. Putting that aside, the spells that your character can use are pretty standard stuff. The weapon types deserve the most praise when it comes to the gameplay. You have a lot of different weapons that you can use if you have the level for it and appropriate stats. I was surprised to learn how some of the stats, like the range on the weapon, actually have a major impact in the combat. You can find very shiny looking weapons and armor for the current hero you're playing or even for other characters. I think that feature is always fun in these types of games because it can incentivize you to play the game with other characters and use the items you found. There is a way to upgrade and customize your weapons, and that's pretty much it. Some of the enemy types in this game look very unique. I'm pretty sure that was everything positive I have to say about Loki. But yeah man, I was really disappointed with how the melee combat feels, and I played way too long with a Norse hero before I switched to a range class. The Egyptian sorcerer and Aztec shaman control a bit better because the range combat is slightly more responsive. So if you're crazy enough to get this game, I highly recommend playing as a range character. The last thing I want to mention is the UI, and not for a good reason. It's really bad. It's hard to compare stats on weapons and armor, and this game doesn't have a character spreadsheet like most Diablo-like RPGs. The UI looks like it's in alpha version, it's very unfinished. Loki had the potential to be a solid Diablo-like RPG, but unfortunately it had many issues. Nowadays you can only get it on Steam, and I wouldn't recommend buying it, mainly because of the poor performance. Number 3. Rise of the Argonauts. Rise of the Argonauts is an action-adventure that came out in 2008. This game was actually being promoted as an action RPG with streamlined character and resource management. Yeah, they were actually trying to promote streamlining in RPGs. I mean, streamlining is not fundamentally bad, but Rise of the Argonauts is definitely more of an action-adventure than anything else. When I first saw the game back in the day, I thought it's just another action-adventure with tacked-on story that doesn't seem very interesting.
Achilles, tell the wine bearer to leave it at the door. We're waiting.
However, when I finally got to play it a couple of days ago, I was pleasantly surprised with how interesting the story is, but very disappointed with the gameplay. It's usually the other way around when it comes to these older, lower-budget action adventures. Rise of the Argonauts follows the story of King Jason. The game has a Greek mythology setting which I really like, and you're going to see a lot of familiar names from this mythology. Not only meet, but befriend them as well.
How many wenches do you have aboard? We've no wenches, Achilles. What?
Hercules is your best friend from the start, and as you play the game and visit more regions, you're going to recruit more legendary heroes. They can help you in combat, and you'll have the option to choose who to bring with you on the next mission. They also banter sometimes, and they have different dialogue lines in different situations.
This place looks deserted. We need to make port where there are some women to be found.
Anyway, Jason's wife is killed in the beginning of the game, and he desperately wants to bring her back with the help of the gods. Literally.
Should you accomplish what you seek, all the rules will have changed.
Shortly after the beginning, you get a ship which basically becomes your hub area. You'll find all characters you recruited here, change your gear, improve your stats, and choose where to sail next. The game has a handful of different maps with unique storylines, and the level design is pretty linear. Every map has some side quests that you can do, and they also have different choices you can make. Rise of the Argonauts has a lot of dialogue and a lot of choices to make. Some of them are clearly illusion of choice, but it seems like some choices actually have some proper consequences. The voice acting is good enough for you to take the story seriously, and I have to say that I really enjoyed the story in general.
There would be riots in the streets of Mycenae if I aided you on such a fool's quest.
I would say it's worth playing this game for the story itself. It's not amazing by any means, but the Greek mythology setting and the characters are interesting enough. If you're a huge fan of Greek mythology, you should definitely consider playing it. But on the other side, the gameplay can sometimes make you pull your hair out. The action combat in this game gets a bit better when you start unlocking stronger skills, but the core of the combat is flawed, to say the least. It feels stiff and unresponsive, it's really inconsistent with its own rules, especially in boss fights, and the AI really likes to cheat in combat. They will usually predict your every move and instantly hit you or dodge. The combat is very heavy on the button mashing, with some pretty cool finishing animations. Using the sword feels the best out of all weapons because it's noticeably faster. Slow weapons in this game just feel extremely sluggish and not fun to use at all. You can change your weapons on the fly in combat, but like I said, the controls are not very responsive and most of your attacks have a long animation lock. Speaking of weapons, we already mentioned that the customization is very streamlined in general. You have 3 weapon types and you'll eventually find new weapons with some slight gameplay bonuses by completing different questlines. Same goes for the armor as well. The way you learn new skills is by dedicating your deeds to different gods. Everything you do in this game is memorized in this menu and you can spend those deeds to increase your stats. It's a bit different compared to the standard level up systems and I kinda like it actually. This allows you to unlock more passive and active skills you can use, which make the combat a little bit more enjoyable. You can use up to 4 active abilities in combat, even on PC. The PC port doesn't have any technical issues, except the poor scaling of UI elements on 4K. But you can't change any graphical settings and you're only limited to 4 active abilities, which is one of the most console limiting factors that a game of this type can have. It's a really lazy PC port, that's what I'm trying to say, but the game works great with a controller on PC. To sum it up, if you can handle the problems with the combat, I would actually recommend playing this game because of the story.
Oh, I have loved all types, and each has been an infinite joy.
Sounds more like lust than love.
Number 2. Bound by Flame. Bound by Flame is an action RPG released in 2014 for PC and consoles. This game was developed by Spiders, the same studio that worked on Technomancer, Greedfall and recently on Steel Rising. I played this game when it came out and I remember that I actually liked the gameplay. However, I couldn't remember anything about the story and after I played it again, I can see why.
Do we look like stiffs to you, dickhead?
This is not my first walk in the wilds, arsewipe.
This studio came a long way when it comes to storytelling in their RPGs and game design in general. The story in this game is very boring and forgettable. It does have a couple of interesting characters here and there and you get to make some important decisions which have actual consequences. The story follows the nameless protagonist, known only as Vulcan. But don't worry, that's not the most generic name in the game.
What have we here? Buffalo in person. Arsewipe.
Yeah. You are the member of some Blades unit and shortly after the beginning you turn into a Witcher, I think. Actually you get possessed by some demon, which gives you some magical powers. Wait, I feel like we already talked about this game in the video.
Enough, I'm not here for sex.
Yeah, anyway, I quickly got bored with the story in the game and focused only on the gameplay. To be honest, the story seems like it could be interesting, but the horrible writing was the last nail in the coffin.
Hey, this guy's fucking fearless.
So I just started skipping all the dialogue except the most important parts. But even so, I still can't remember what the story was all about, so there's that. So what about the gameplay? Well, there are a few reasons why I kinda like it. It's enough for me to care about the game in general and not quit because of the bad story and writing, which should tell you enough how I feel about the gameplay. But of course, we're going to get a bit more technical than that. Bound by Flame has some pretty snappy controls and decent combat animations. The major thing it lacks to make the combat feel very good is the sense of impact. The lack of impact makes it feel a bit floaty, but even so, I still think it feels pretty decent. The game offers you 3 different skill trees, which allow you to improve your melee, ranged, stealth and magic skills. Yeah, there is a pretty janky stealth system in the game, but it's functional. The game is pretty much forcing you to use everything at your disposal, even though you have the freedom to invest points into skills you want to use more frequently. Your hotbar is mainly for mapping your magic skills, potions and traps, and it's also used as a tactical menu. For the majority of the game you'll have a companion at your side and you can issue some basic commands through this menu. It kinda feels pointless and underdeveloped, to be honest. The companions are pretty useful in fights though. The game is not very long and levels are small, with a couple of optional areas to explore. You'll find different weapons, armor pieces and materials by looting containers on the map. If you play Greedfall, the crafting system in this game will be very familiar. But compared to that game, the crafting system in Bound by Flame is bare bones. The reason why I mentioned that you have to use everything at your disposal in fights is because of the difficulty. Even on easy and normal, the game is really challenging, especially if you focus on melee skills like I did. Traps, magic spells, ranged and melee attacks, everything is useful in combat. If you try to play it as a hack and slash game like I did, you're probably going to die a lot. That being said, I think the character progression is pretty weak in the game, especially when it comes to melee skills. The majority of melee abilities you can unlock are passive, which is pretty boring. Come to think of it, other skill trees are almost identical. As with the majority of action RPGs on a budget, the boss fights leave a lot to be desired. There are some bad fights and reused enemies, but for the most part the boss fights are okay for lower budget RPG standards. You can complete the game in about 15 hours or so, and I would recommend getting it if you like what you see. Just don't expect an amazing action RPG with a great story.
Arsewipe.
Visually, the game holds up pretty good, and I didn't have any issues with the performance on highest detail on 4K resolution. Number 1. Enclave.
Eat this!
Enclave is an action-adventure from 2002. It's a pretty old game, but would you believe me if I told you that the gameplay in Enclave is 10 times more fun than any other game on this list? It's very simple yet extremely addictive. You might run into a couple of technical issues if you get this game on PC today. It turns out my game was not working as intended because it was skipping frames and the game speed was messed up. Of all things, this issue was related to the refresh rate of the mouse cursor. I was able to fix it by reducing the polling rate from 1000 to 125. But before that, I already played the game a lot, and even in that broken state I liked the gameplay. So what's Enclave all about? Well, first of all, this game doesn't bother you a lot with the story, but whenever you get to watch a cutscene, they are pretty long. The intro cutscene is about 5 minutes long, and I love the way it's presented. To sum it up, it's basically the fight between good and evil, but the game has a lot of soul. What's perhaps the most interesting when it comes to this, you have two different campaigns, Light and Dark. However, you can only unlock Dark when you complete the Light campaign. Dark campaign allows you to play the game from the evil perspective and you get a lot of new characters to choose. Most of them are the NPCs you fought before when you played the Light campaign. The game is not very long, but the gameplay can be really challenging. It's fast-paced action with old-school level design and a lot of playable characters that you get to unlock as you play the game. What I found the most impressive in this game is the enemy AI, which can put to shame a lot of modern action games. I feel like the AI in most modern games is just going backwards, instead of making some giant leaps. There are few exceptions here and there, but playing Enclave will definitely make you think about this. For example, the ranged enemies are very effective when it comes to using the environment as a cover. Sometimes it almost feels like you're playing against real people, that's how good it is. Melee enemies are very good at chasing you down, even when they have to precisely use the jump mechanic. But not to the point where it feels like they are cheating, because they can also make mistakes. Positioning your character is the most important thing in these action combats. It might seem a bit clumsy at first, because it is, but it didn't take me long to start loving how it feels. Probably because killing enemies in this game is just extremely satisfying. Like I said, you're going to unlock a lot of different characters and most of them have something unique. They use different weapons and armor, which you get to select before you start the level. My favorite character was the Huntress because I really liked the range gameplay in Enclave. She can unlock different bows with more than a couple of different arrow types. This game doesn't hold your hand at all, and I spend a lot of time without even knowing that I can fire multiple arrows at once. You have exploding, fire, sniper, and a couple of more arrow types which can be useful in different situations. The melee combat is also pretty fun once you get used to the movement and the range of the weapon. The hitboxes are really small on most enemies, so you really need to get close to them. When it comes to the level design, almost all levels in the game have a couple of scripted events with destructible environments. Even though they're scripted, it feels very nice when you get to see them for the first time, especially in such an old game. The level design in general is really fun, with simple puzzles that you occasionally have to solve. Sure, the game can feel a bit outdated in some areas, but the gameplay is extremely addictive, with a pretty strong replay value. Enclave is definitely a hidden gem if you ask me, and I would recommend buying it today. The HD version of the game was announced in the summer, and it was supposed to be released on PS4, PS5 and Nintendo Switch, but we don't know what's happening with these ports. And that would be it for this video. Tell me which game looks the best to you and why. Leave a comment down below. If you plan to get some of these games on GOG, just remember that you can use my link and it's a nice way to support the channel. Feel free to leave a comment with some of the games that you wish to see in this series. I'm keeping my eye on all recommendations for games that I could cover in future videos. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more RPG contents. If you want to go a step further, you can become a Patreon or a YouTube member. Even the smallest support means a lot. Big thanks to all of my current Patreons and YouTube members. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.